dresser, as well as laundry, because that's what we do best. I had to disappear for a bit. I had some uniform that I had to do for a client that didn't want it, so I didn't. I hid the uniform. There we go. So now, time to clean out the soap using. I am clearing out a funnel. In case you're wondering what I was doing and what that noise was. We are just waiting for the washer to finish, and we'll leave that upside down to drain. I'm sorry I'm not as inspiring and exciting this afternoon. Oh, goodness me. Wow. Anyway, I've got a quick story that I thought I'd read you. It's a short one. It's called Across the Fields by Susan Price. It's a very, very, very quick story that I'm going to give you as a little surprise bonus for the afternoon of Tuesday, since we finished our ironing and we've got an hour. So I thought, why not have a story? Don't you worry. It's fine. We're fine. We're going to just do a quick impromptu story. I'm just gonna, no, I don't want that one. Oh my goodness. No, I just thought I'd give you all a very impromptu story. You see, you don't get these often, do you? Impromptu stuff. You don't get these. Noelle, hello. Are you ready for a story, Noelle? Then I'll begin. Across the Fields by Susan Price from 1991, from the book Haunting Christmas Tales, and it's very haunting indeed. Right. A brazier held the fire in the centre of the hut. Its iron bars were crumbling with rust, but the coals were red hot inside, sending out waves of heat to meet the long thin drafts of cold wind that came in through the gaps in the planking walls. The men, their bodies blackened with the coating of sweat, water and coal dust, crowded close to the fire, shivering and trying to wipe themselves dry with old rags, shirts or sheets of newspaper. "Never mind, Christmas tomorrow," one of them shouted, and the others laughed. Christmas Day was the only day in the whole year the mine didn't work. When they were more or less dry, though still filthy with coal dust, the men pulled on trousers, shirts and jackets in 1924. There were no pithead baths. They crowded around the fire, shoulders jostling, trying to get warm before the long dark walk home. From hand to hand they passed the jug of beer the mine owner left them in the hut for every shift of men coming up the shaft. As they drank or waited for their turn to drink, they listened to the wind blowing around the hut and shrieking in the gaps. "Oh, Grace'll be walking tonight," one of the men said, and there was more laughter. There was a soft rap on the door of the hut, which only the nearest man heard. He opened it a crack and then pulled it wide to allow someone to come in. "Hello, Chris." "John," he called, "the little sister's here. Come to walk home with thee so thee don't get scared." That made all the men laugh again, and several of them began coughing badly. The girl recognized her brother's cough among them, sharp and loud. John almost always coughed when other people laughed. The men crowded together to let the little girl come to the fire and stand beside her brother. She was about 13, tall for her age and thin, wearing a long limp skirt that almost hid her boots. On her head was an old man's cap, with a thick tartan shawl folded over it and wrapped tightly about her body. Between the cap's peak and the shawl, her eyes glistened brightly, and her nose glowed in the bright red from the cold outside. The book is called Across the Fields by Susan Price. Right, I'll continue now. Okay. And her nose glowed bright from the cold outside. She looked quickly and shyly at all the men's faces, even though she was standing beside him. She wasn't quite sure that she recognized her brother. All the faces were black and shiny, as if they'd been polished with the black lead that her mother used on the cooking range at home. And in the tawny golden red light from the fire, their faces shone and glowed as the rain shone by the fire of the light. But their eyes glittered white, and every glance and swivel of their eyeballs seemed exaggerated and comic and horrible all at once, and their lips, washed by the beer, were bright red. With a final cough, the man beside her said, "What's up, Emily?" Then she knew for sure it was John. "Have they been paid?" she asked, and jumped as all the men around her laughed aloud. "After thy money? Her's learning early," one said. "I shall be paid tonight," John replied. "Mother wants thee to fetch the meat for our Christmas dinner." John nodded and took the jug from the man beside him. As he drank, the other miner asked the girl, "Thee walk here on thy own, me flower, in the dark?" She nodded. "And thou warn't scared?" he asked. He grinned at her. From the other side of the brazier, another man said, "Did thou meet our Grace?" "Ah, with a dead white face and a long wet hair hanging down her back," said another, "and her eyes staring, and her hands reaching out for whoever she can find." The miners laughed as the girl turned aside from them, pretending she wasn't interested. She knew who they were talking about. Everyone in the neighbourhood knew the story of Grace, the gypsy girl, who had drowned herself in the flood clay pit and now, so people said, walked over the fields at night, trying to find and drown others. It's a ghost story. "John, hurry up," Emily said. "We've got to get that meat." "Plenty of time," John said. It was true. The market would stay open until at least 9, and it could only be about 7 now. "I don't want to be out late," said Hermione, and nudged John. "If they're out late, they might meet Padfoot." He stooped towards Emily. "They're sure they didn't hear Padfoot padding along after thee as they come along the path?" "I don't believe in ghosts," Emily said, and the hut was filled again with a roar of the miners' laughter. "Hey, be serious though," said another miner. "Have they ever heard that screaming as they's walking home?" asked a third man. "I remember the time." Emily moved closer to John and looked pleadingly up at him. She didn't want to hear any more of these frightening stories. John smiled his red lips smile and shouted, "Happy Christmas, lads, where I'm going home." He reached out and opened the door of the hut, letting in a broad, cold blast of air as he and Emily moved out into the darkness, followed by a cheery, merry chorus of "Happy Christmas, Happy Christmas, little un, Happy Christmas." Outside in the dark, another fire burned near the mine shaft, an open brick-lined hole in the ground. It was the only light to be seen nearby. Beyond its flickering was a deep darkness. John passed by the fire with his quick, long stride, and Emily hurried after him, her boots clop-clopping on the stony, hard, frozen ground. Above them glittered a wide expanse of silver stars. A black shape loomed up ahead. It was a mine office. They rounded the building, and Emily was glad to see the yellow lamplight spilling from its windows. She waited outside, leaning against the wooden wall and hugging herself inside a shawl, while John went in to hand over his candle can and collect his money. Emily was cold and wished he would hurry up. Even there in the mine yard, she didn't like the dark. She couldn't help thinking of that our Grace might suddenly whip into sight with the long wet hair, a white drowned face and a reaching hands. Even the knowledge that John and the light of the mine office were only a step behind her didn't make her feel any better. She would still have seen Grace, her swollen drowned face, and her mouth moving as she called your name. Quickly, Emily pushed the door and went into the office to stand close behind John, so close that she touched him. Being near her brother always made her feel better. He never seemed to be afraid of anything, not of going underground, nor of the dark, or the big dogs or strangers, or mice or spiders or anything. Yet still she looked fearfully towards the door, wondering if the yellow light of the oil lamp would really keep Grace out of the office, if she were in the yard. John felt a touch against him, looked down and smiled. "Come on, Chuck," he said, moving towards the door. She followed him. It meant going out into the dark again, but at least now she would be with John, and he didn't fear ghosts as much as while he was with her. He walked to work in the dark most days. He worked all day in the dark and walked home again in the dark, and he thought nothing of it. Ghosts didn't come near people who didn't believe in them, did they? So Emily hoped. John had worked hard all day, but he still walked fast as he led the way by dark, unlit field paths towards the town of Oldbury and its market. Emily had to put many a hop and a skip into her walk to stop herself from falling behind. Slipping one hand out of her shawl, she gripped him by the belt to help herself. "Here," he said, "keep the hand warm," and he slipped her arm through his, and held her hand in his dirty warm one. His hands were always hot, as if he had a fire burning in him, but she was still out of breath by the time they reached Oldbury. The marketplace was lit by flaring white gas lamps, with pitch-black shadows between pools of light. There were still many people about, all those who had delayed shopping for their Christmas dinner as long as possible in order to buy cheap, and John and Emily kept their arms linked as they pushed through the crowds and made their way to the butcher's stall, where blood had collected in pools between the cobbles where the chickens' heads and legs lay scattered everywhere. Even in the cold, there was a bad smell of blood, fresh, and chicken guts. John was tired and wanted to go home, bath and sleep, so he didn't take long about marketing. On one stall he spotted a large goose hanging by its legs. "I bet," he said to Emily, "that he can't sell that. Too big, nobody wants it." "How much for the big un, mate?" he called to the stall-holder, pointing to the goose. The stall-holder looked up at the bird and pulled a face. He knew he wasn't going to sell the bird, and he had no way of keeping it fresh to sell for another day. "7 and 6, he yelled. "I'll give thee 5 shilling, John said, and the stall-holder took the bird down without another word and began wrapping it in newspaper. Emily wasn't happy. "Too much," she whispered. "It's Christmas," John said, and went on to buy sweets for her and the 2 other sisters and the 3 brothers at home. "We'll have no money left," Emily said, wanting the sweets but afraid of what the mother would say. "It's my money," said John. They started walking home, John's pockets stuffed with bags of sweets and his arms wrapped around the goose. Emily held on to his belt to help her keep up, her hand warmed by the shelter of his jacket and the heat of his body through his shirt. She was tired, having been up early to scrub the kitchen floor before going to school, then running errands after school, and finally coming on this long walk with her brother. She leaned her head on his arm as they walked. Once they were out of town, they were faced with a long road home. John suddenly stopped walking, hugging the goose to himself and lowering his head. Emily knew that he was overcome with the thought of how far they had yet to walk before they were home, and then he still had to bath before he could go to bed. "It'd be shorter," he said, "if we cut across the fields." Emily straightened up, lifting her head up from his arm. She didn't like that idea at all. The fields were wide, cold, empty, and dark. But she had to give a more sensible reason than that. "It's dangerous," she said. "What about all the old pit workings and quarries? We might fall in one." "I'm not walking all the way round," John said, turning off the road and striking out across the rough ground of the field. Emily let go of his belt and stood for a moment. She thought about walking home by herself. She looked about up and down the road, but there was no one in sight, and the roadway, lit only by widely spaced gas lamps, seemed darker without John. And John, with his quick long stride and without her hanging on his belt, was already growing smaller and fading into the darkness. Even walking across the field, she quickly decided, was better than walking all the way by herself, thinking about drowned Grace and the ghost dog Padfoot, whom you saw when you were going to die. "Wait for me, John," hugging a shawl about her. Emily ran from the road over the field. The frozen ground was just as hard underfoot as the pavement, and frozen leaves rustled under her boots. John stopped and turned, waiting for her. Breathless, she caught up with him, and wrapped her fingers about his belt again under his jacket. "We'll soon be home," he said. "Have a mince pie afore we go to bed." They didn't waste breath on talking after that. Emily was surprised, as always, that John could walk so quickly after spending all day crouching underground, hacking at coal and rock. He swung on his stride after stride, hugging the dead goose to his chest, his head lowered to watch where he put his feet, his breath drifting before him in a puff after puff of white mist. Emily's own breath wreathed her face as she panted beside him, forced to work her little legs just a little too fast, so that her hips ached. Her heels jolted hard on the ground and shook her with every step. Her throat was raw from gasping at the freezing air, but she didn't ask John to slow down. After all, she thought, peering around them into the dark, the quicker they walked, the sooner they would be home and safe from the night. The fields around them could only be felt as the cold, open space over which the wind blew to scrape them. Nothing could be seen but blackness. Even the path beneath their feet was only dimmer grey in the darkness. Emily hoped they were on the right path. In the dark, it could be any path, and anything could be out there in the darkness, hidden from them. As they walked, Emily kept looking all around, glancing back over her shoulder every few seconds, and squinting her eyes to peer into the darkness ahead. If there was any danger, she wanted to see it before it reached them, but despite this care, she didn't see the man coming. She only heard his voice, suddenly barking out in the darkness on John's other side. "Evening." Emily leaned around John and saw a stranger walking beside her brother in the dark. She could just make out the darker area of his working clothes and the pale white stripe of his muffler. Between the muffler and the dark cap was a not-so-pale blur of his face. "Evening," John said, friendly and unafraid, while Emily clung more tightly to his belt and pressed closer to him. The man was not a ghost, she had feared, but now she was afraid that he was a robber or a murderer who had been waiting for them on this dark field path. "Happy Christmas," her brother added. "Oh," said the man, his deep voice grumbling through the dark cold air. "It ain't Christmas yet. Not until the last stroke of midnight." Their feet crunched on the frost-hardened path. John's light, quick, steady tread, and Emily's skip, hop, and jump. She listened to the stranger, but his feet made no sound. The stranger spoke again. "Where they going?" "Home," John said, "as quickly as we can." "What's the hurry?" asked the stranger. "Why don't they come to the match? They could win a prize, strong lad like thee." "Match?" John asked, and Emily tugged at his belt and whispered, "John!" But neither did hear her nor took notice. "A wrestling match," said the stranger. "I know thee for a good wrestler, lad." "John, I've got to get home." Emily said, "We've got to get home. There's prizes." The family always needed money or extra food, especially at Christmas, whether the prize was money or cake or another goose. It tempted John. "There's prizes," said the stranger, and Emily didn't like the way he said it, as if there were other things he wasn't saying. "About or two of them," John said, not seeming to notice anything odd about the way the man had spoken. Emily tugged at his belt, but he ignored her, and she could have wept with anger and disappointment. She so much wanted to get home safely and into the warmth and light. "Oh, John, let's go home," she wailed. "I'm tired. Come home. We've got to get to bed." John looked around. "They run on home," he said, sounding bad-tempered. Emily looked ahead at the thin path of hard dirt that ran through long grey tussocks of wilted frozen grass and leafless bushes, and quickly faded into the black winter darkness. She almost did as he said. She could see herself in the imagination running hard along the path until she reached the safety of streets and houses. In imagination she could feel her running feet hitting the ground. But she was afraid of what she might meet on her own, without John's warmth and confidence to keep the ghosts away. And she was afraid to leave her brother alone too, without a fears to warn him, trusting and friendly as he was. As he protected her, so she felt she protected him, and they should stay together. Who knew who this stranger was, or what he really wanted? He might kill John to get the goose. "I'll come with thee," she said in a small, frightened voice. She imagined the man taking something heavy from his pocket like a brick or an iron bar, and hitting John on the head with it, and she knew she couldn't stop him, but she also felt fiercely that she could try. She could kick the man hard, she could bite him till he bled, she could shout and shout louder than she'd ever shouted, she could run and fetch help. Even if she couldn't stop the man hurting John, she could make sure he didn't get away with it. The stranger left the path and struck off along the long, crunching, frozen grass of the field. John followed him, and Emily, clutching at John's belt, followed John. Whenever she could, Emily peered around John at the stranger, trying to see what he looked like, so that she could describe him to the police if she had to. But she could never see his face clearly. It was always hidden by his cap, or by his turned-up collar and muffler. She thought he had a dark moustache. She thought his cheeks and chin were darkened by a beard stubble, and that he was trying, as much as she could tell, to hide. "Just you try anything," she thought at him. "Just you try. I'll kick your feet from under you. I'll bite your fingers off." I wish very much that she was bigger and stronger. They were very far from the path now, and when Emily looked around and behind them, she saw nothing but deep blue-grey darkness, with black shapes of low bushes emerging from it. But from the head came a noise. It was a murmur, a buzzing, and a rising and a falling. The sound of voices clamouring together, as they had clamoured in the marketplace. But here the sound had a colder, more frozen note, as it faded and was lost in the open fields. She wanted to ask John one more time not to go to this meeting, but to come home with her, but she knew that he would have changed his mind by now. There was light ahead, red and golden light, shining out of the darkness like a jewel. Black shapes moved across it, blocking out its light, and then letting it shine again. A fire with people moving around it. John picked up his heels and walked even more quickly to reach the fire and the people, and Emily had to run to stay up with him. She felt tears in her eyes as she ran towards what was frightening her. They came nearer to the fire and felt its heat blow towards them on the wind, bringing a shower of sparks and cinders together with an ashy smell of burning. The stranger began to clap his hands and shout, "Here we be! Here we be! Here's a lad to give a wee bout. Here's a lad who'll be bet his wages, his goose and his heart and his soul." Emily didn't like the sound of that, and she didn't like it when the people left the fire and came to meet them, crowding round them so that they were hemmed in. She didn't like it when the men pressed close and began to slap John on the shoulder, because he was so small among them that she felt that she was being smothered in the crowd, and because she was afraid she would lose her grip on John's belt and be pushed away from him. She took hold of his belt with both hands and let herself be dragged almost off her feet as he was carried forwards in the noise of the crowd, closer to the light and the heat of the fire. A dark young man, as tall as John but broader, stood squarely between them and the fire. His face was in a deep shadow and couldn't be seen. He started to take off his jacket, and as he did so, he said, "For the goose." John grinned and passed the goose to Emily. She took it soft, limp and heavy in her arms. John took off his cap and put it on Emily's head, on top of a shawl and the cap she already wore. He unwound his muffler and hung it around her neck, and he took off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. Then in his shirt sleeves and in the bitter cold, he bent at the knees and held his arms out to the other young man. The crowd around them backed away to give them room. Emily hated being there and having to watch. She felt desperately that John must win, felt it so much that it hurt, not only because he was her brother, but because if he lost the goose, the whole family would have to go without Christmas dinner, and the 5 shillings spent on it would be wasted. She didn't think they would dare go home and face her mother after spending 5 shillings on a goose and then losing it. And wrestling was a rough game. The other man looked heavier than John. It was as if he was a better wrestler as well. Then John would be badly hurt, and if John was hurt, then he wouldn't be able to work, and they were always short of money, even when John was in work. John had to win. He had to. He just had to. She hugged the goose tightly and swallowed over a painful hot lump in her throat. The 2 men had wrapped their arms around each other and were now trying to crush the breath from each other's ribs while struggling to tip each other with their feet. Emily watched her, unblinking, her eyes watering in the cold, wishing hard for John to win. But the fear that he would lose was equal to all her hope. It was unbearable to hope and to fear so much, and she had to turn away from the wrestlers. She found herself looking instead at the faces in the crowd, lit warmly red and gold by the light of the fire, and her eyes picked out one woman's face. She had seen that woman somewhere before. She jumped up as a shout went up all around her, shaking the cold air. John was on the ground. The other had thrown him down, and as she watched her brother got up, and again they wrapped their arms around each other. Emily looked again for the woman in the crowd. She couldn't see her anymore, but she noticed a man. She knew his face too, and couldn't think of his name. There was another shout, and John was on the ground again. John was losing. Oh, John, she thought, hugging their goose, their Christmas dinner, which they were going to lose. How could they win when they were so tired? Why didn't they come home with me? She had to look away again. She couldn't bear to watch, and there was another face she knew, the face of a boy this time. Now she knew that boy's face very well. Who was he? The crowd shouted a third time, but Emily didn't look to see which of the wrestlers had been thrown. She remembered where she had seen the boy before. He had been in her class at school. Had it been last year or the year before? But he was no longer at the school because... She turned even colder as she remembered. Because he had died. He had died of consumption. She had seen his funeral go past in the street. They had prayed for him at school, and they had been asked to remember him. Dead and buried. That boy, yet here he was at Christmas Eve, at a wrestling match, out in the wild dark fields. She felt a tugging at the goose in her arms, and looked up into the face of the dark young man, John's opponent, who was taking the goose from her. "I won," he said, and he wasn't even out of breath. Emily let him take the goose, because he had won it, and because she was afraid. She remembered that where she had seen the woman she had noticed earlier. That woman had lived 3 doors away from them when Emily had been a little girl, until she'd gone away. It had been a long time before Emily discovered the woman had died. And the man she had noticed, she had last seen the man with John a long time ago, when John had first started working on the pit. He had worked with the man. Emily had seen him outside the pub, laughing and joking with John, and John had gone to his funeral after he had been killed by a roof falling at the mine. Shrinking in on herself, hugging herself small, she glanced quickly at the crowd about her and thought, dead, all dead. We're in the company of the dead. John had got to his feet and had come over to her and the young man who now held the goose. I wasn't ready, he said, breathing hard and short, out of breath. He coughed before adding, again I'll win the goose back. John, Emily said, reaching out for him. No. She wanted to tell him about the people around them. She wanted to point out the dead neighbour woman and his dead workmate and her dead school friend, but her voice squeaked like a mouse, and John took no notice of his nervous little sister. The goose if thou win, said the dark, dead young man. What if I win? John reached into his trouser pocket and he heard the jingle of coins. I've no use for money, said the young dark man. John dropped the coins back into his pocket and looked up in surprise. What then? Emily felt all the people around, all the dead people, move closer. And she darted to John and put her arms around his waist. He absent-mindedly dropped his arm around her shoulders as he waited for an answer. Thy heart and thy soul, said the young dark man. Emily hugged John tighter in warning, but John laughed and coughed and said, Me heart and me soul? What be use of them to thee? The fire flared and its red light glowed over the dark young man's face, showing a damp twist of hair and the deep hollows above and below his eyes. The skin stretched tight over his cheekbones and the shape of his teeth showing through his lips. As Emily held on to John, she felt him stare with shock. Tom Rugley, he cried, drawing a long breath of cold air, which made him cough. Emily, hugging him, felt the cough shake him. Thou's dead, Tom, John said, and then he said to himself, I'm dreaming. Bet me heart and soul, said Tom Rugley. I'll dance to the beat of thy heart, mine don't dance no more. I'll feel with my soul, mine don't feel no more. If I win, I'll live in thee, and thou won't live no more. Emily felt John's arm tighten around her, and his other arm come around her too. He lifted her right off her feet, up to his chest, and she felt him move a step or two. He was going to run and take her with him, but then he stopped, and looking about, Emily saw all the people around them coming closer, their arms held out to block their way. John's grip on her loosened, and she slipped back to the ground. There were too many of the dead all around them, and all too strong. They could not run away. Then we'll wrestle, John said. But here's the wager. If I lose me heart and soul, but if I win, the little wench goes home with the goose. When she heard that, Emily's heart swelled and grew full of soul with love and gratitude. Tears pressed against the back of her eyes, and she took John's warm hand in both of hers and held it tight. All around them the dead murmured and whispered, and to the front of the crowd came pushing the dead woman. The young girls and all the little girls who had died as children, they all stared at Emily with their sunken eyes. And there was one. Emily shivered and hid her face against John's shirt sleeve. There was one with long black hair hanging over her shoulders that dripped water onto the ground. even in this freezing weather. A man's voice from the back of the crowd called, "Grace!" And she turned her head, the wan water flying from her hair, and the whispering, the murmuring from all the dead women and girls said, "But we want her. We want her." "Then it's a good wager," John said. "More to win, more to lose. My heart and my soul against the little wrench and the goose. What tha say, Tom?" Tom Rugley looked around at the dead, and then he looked back at John, and slowly, despite the cold whispering in the air, he nodded. John pushed Emily gently away from him, and the second wrestling match began. Emily watched this time, gritting her teeth until her jaws ached, as John strained to throw the dead man and not be thrown himself. By sheer skill, he got his foot around the foot of the dead man and threw him, over his hip, to the ground. But the dead man got up again at once. No struggle. He can't tire, nor can a fall hurt a dead man. And closed on John again. As Emily watched, her heart aching more each time, as her brother was thrown once, twice, 3 times, and lost the match. How else could it have ended? John had worked all day and walked to the market and back and fought 1 bout already, while his opponent would always fight with the same untiring strength. He had lost, and now he lay on the hard frozen ground where he'd been thrown, while all the dead turned to Emily. "New lives for old," said Tom Rugley. "Who shall I give the little wench to?" "Thou hasn't won me," Emily said, her voice shrill, out through the dark, sharp with fright. "John lost, so thou've won him, heart and soul, but thou've not won me." "Art going to wrestle?" asked Tom Rugley, and around them came dry laughter of the dead. Emily ran across the little open space at the centre of the gathering to where John half sat, half lay on the ground. She took his jacket from around her shoulders and put it around his. "I can't wrestle," she said, "but I can riddle. I'll ask thee a riddle. If thou can answer it, thou shalt ask me one first. One who can answer it is the loser." "But what's the wager?" asked the dead man. "If I lose, thou win us both," said Emily. "If I win, thou lose us both. Win all, lose all." The dead crowd closed. The dead whispered and shook their heads, but Emily said, "Fancy a dead man being scared to take a bet." "You're on," said Tom Rugley. "And I'll ask the first riddle," she said. And she asked the hardest one she knew, one she'd learned from school. In a hall, as white as milk, lined skin as soft as silk, in a fountain crystal clear, a golden apple does appear. No doors there are to this stronghold, but thieves break in and steal the gold. What is it? "That's an old one," said Tom Rugley, "and the answer's known to all of us here. It's an egg. And now I ask one. How many wild strawberries grow in the salted sea?" Emily was kneeling on the ground beside John, and she looked into his face, hoping he might know the answer. She could hardly see his face in the dark, but even so it was plain that he had no idea more than she did. "How many wild strawberries?" she said, and knew the answer must be a tricky one. And then it seemed to her that she had heard the riddle before, and she knew the answer. She snatched at it without wondering what it meant. "As many as fish swim in the forest." She saw by the way the dead people's shoulders sagged in disappointment that she had given the right answer. Here's my next riddle. It was another hard one she'd been taught at school. White bird featherless flew from paradise, landed on the castle wall. Along came Sir Landless, took it up handless, rode away horseless to the king's white hall. What is it? Another old riddle, said Tom Rugley. What's old we know. The answer is a snowflake in the wind. Here's my riddle. How quickly can you travel around the world? This is hard, thought Emily. The dead man knew far better riddles than she did. She had no idea of how long it would take to travel even to Wales. But then the answer suddenly jumped into her head. If you get up with the sun and keep up with the sun, you can travel all around the world in one day, like the sun does. And here's my riddle. And she thought, I had better make it a good one, a new one, because I might not be able to answer another one of his. She thought, make it a new one. The dead know all the old riddles. And she began to think frantically while the ghosts waited. Hurry, hurry, she kept telling herself. Think of an answer first, then make a riddle to fit it. She thought so quickly that when she spoke the beginning of the riddle, she had no idea how it would end. I nothing fear but morning bird's song. My heart is still, but still it longs. By day I'm gone, by night I show clear. Now riddle me what I be. To her relief, Tom Rugley didn't answer. He stared at her and then looked around at the other dead. A new riddle, he said. Can't thee answer it? Emily asked. Thou lost if I can't. I can answer it. I can answer it. By day I'm gone, by night I show clear. Emily and John sat together on the cold, hard ground, and they looked at each other and they waited. All around them the dead whispered together. Dost thee give up? Emily asked. Is it too hard? Gone by day but clear by night, said Tom Rugley. It's the moon. No, Emily said. Then it's the stars, said another of the dead. No, Emily said. The dead looked at each other. Can't be the sun, one of them muttered. Dost thou give up? Emily asked. The night drew on, and it drew colder and colder. Emily and John sat wrapped in her thick, heavy shawl, huddling close together to keep warm amidst the cold company of the dead. I nothing fear but morning bird's song, said Grace, the drowned girl, whose hair never stopped dripping water. Is it a worm? No, said Emily, her head leaning on John's shoulder, because she was so tired she couldn't hold up its weight. My heart is still, but it's still it longs, said the dead man who had led them there. I can't make out of that. It's a stupid riddle, said Tom Rugley. Does that mean to give up? Emily asked. No, and on went the guessing game until midnight was past, and then more hours, and there came the coldest, darkest time of night, when Emily and John shivered together despite the shawl, and the deep cold set John coughing again. The dead couldn't guess the answer to the riddle, but they wouldn't give up their chance of winning living hearts and souls either. It must be the moon. It can only be the moon. No, Emily said, her eyes closed. Then it's the stars. It has to be. No. My heart is still. It must be something dead, said one of the ghosts thoughtfully, and Emily opened her eyes and held her breath. But the right answer didn't come. But though they went on trying, the ghosts could not guess the answer, and they went on trying till the sky was grey and the air still colder than it had been all night. They went on trying until from far over the field came the first morning cock call, the first cock crow of Christmas Day. And on Christmas Day and the 12 days of Christmas, ghosts and the dead and the witches have no power. As the cock crowed a second time, a rustle of movement ran through the crowd of the dead. They drew back from John and Emily and looked at each other, and as the cock crowed a third time, they turned and ran away across the dark field. Without a sound they went, no shouting and no sound of feet on the ground. They vanished into the deep grey of the morning twilight, running for the graves in all the little churchyards around the keep. John and Emily knelt upon the hard cold ground and watched them go. John put his arms around Emily and hugged her tight. They got to their feet, moving very stiffly and slowly because they were so cold. John picked up the goose and checked that his pockets were still full of sweets, and then they went on slowly across the fields to home. They lived in a little house that was one in a long row. John lifted the latch and they went in. Their whole family was gathered in the little room. Mince pies were being made at the table. One sister was rolling out the pastry, and little brother was cutting the pastry out with a cup. Another was greasing tins. Their mother was putting mincemeat in the cases. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked up as they went in. "Where have they been?" the mother shouted. John and Emily looked at each other. "We come across the fields and we got lost," John said. "I thought the boogeyman had they," said the mother. John and Emily looked at each other. John handed the goose over to his mother. "All of they? Upstairs," said the mother to the children. "John's got to have a bath. There's hot water in the copper, John." All the children left the mince pies and went through to the stairs. Emily followed them, and after her came John on his way to get the tin bath from the yard. At the foot of the stairs he stopped her and whispered, "I think I know the answer. Is it a ghost?" Emily grinned and nodded and went on up the stairs. "If you want to hide something," John said, "put it in full view." And he went to fetch the bath. Afterwards they had roast goose for Christmas dinner and mince pies, and when John walked to work in the dark early next morning, he didn't go across the fields, even though the 12 days of Christmas still had 11 days to run. So I think John had learned his lesson, don't you? Did you like your little very, very short story? It's 3:45, so I'm going to have to say goodbye because I've got to go fold some laundry and do a dishwasher. Don't I have a fun and exciting life? But I just thought you'd like a little ghost story from Haunting Christmas Tales, and that was Across the Fields by Susan Price. I thought you might like that. Just a little short story. Thank you. I'm so glad you've enjoyed it. Mr. Sharky, you've just come at the right time, mate. We're having a ghost story. I've been doing a collection of ghost stories, impromptu, normally on a Friday and a Saturday. I kind of thought you might like a little surprise this afternoon. Just a short story. It's only 45 minutes. It's good to see you, Sharky. Hello, Carol. Happy Christmas, my lovely. I thought you might like a ghost story. Hope you all enjoyed the short It's good to see you too, Sharky. Yes, that was Over the Fields by Susan Bryce. And it was a good one. I like that one. No, Across the Fields, sorry. Hello, Paisley. Well, I don't feel very pretty. I feel like I've been working all day. And it's been a very long day. But we've only got 6 days to go. Yeah, think. We started off with 8 on Monday. 7 today. 6 tomorrow. It's 6 tomorrow. Thank you very much, Another Space Note. I'm sorry to surprise you with this one. But I thought I had an hour. And I thought you might just like a ghost story. And anyway, we're working our way through Haunting Christmas Tales. And when we've done them all in here, we'll do another one. Okay? Because I have quite a few Christmas ghost storybooks. Of course she does. She's the fairy. She's always got a story for every occasion. That's my job, right? Anyway, I hope you really enjoyed it. And I will say goodbye. I have to go fold some laundry now. See you later, everyone. Bye-bye, darlings.